So let's get underway here. You see Peter's on the top part of your screen, and there's Luis down on the bottom. Luis also a huge fan of Collected Company. He loves just casting the cards, spinning the wheel, as it were, and of course it fits well into this deck for the reasons that Bloody outlined, in that you can find cards like Mayhem Devil, even two of them off of a Collected Company, and completely change the way the board looks, and that can be on your opponent's end step. Here, it looks like Luis is going to kick things off with Lovestruck Beast, so just going to make the little 1/1 human before passing the turn back to Peter. There's Growth Spiral on turn 2 for Peter, which is right where Peter wants to be. Getting a Growth Spiral away here is important, and an important sequence for the Sultai deck as well, to be able to Growth Spiral into untapped land for a Thoughtseize when necessary. Now, Peter will know what Luis is on here and recognizes, I'm just going to go ahead and keep my life total intact, play a Triome, tapped, and get my mana under me. Then I can go ahead and fire off either a 4-drop next turn, or this turn, for example, Peter could play Growth Spiral and Thoughtseize, something like that.
Yeah, I really like, going back to Luis's end of the board, I really like his configuration of the deck that has Dreadhorde Butchers, because you're able to get a game plan going that's not entirely revolving around just Cat Up and Mayhem Devils. Like, you're starting to give yourself more avenues, and it's super useful against stuff like Sultai Midrange or Ramp decks, where you're gonna present a more powerful threat every single turn. And if they don't specifically Extinction Event you, then it gets dicey for them. And especially diversifying your mana pool or your converted mana cost on your board is a very interesting note, given that most removals right now are just Extinction Event with odd even.
That's right, and it'll be really interesting to see how Luis does this. It looks like he's content to just play Blood Crypt into Mayhem Devil here rather than firing off the second Butcher, for the exact reason that you just outlined. He doesn't want to play right into an Extinction Event, and this gives him even odd. So no matter what Peter chooses, he can't sweep the entire board with an Extinction Event.
Yeah, so it's really heads up from Luis, and it's also just making sure that you have some fuel to throw down if you get completely removed. We'll see the Extinction Event come down, and I imagine it has to go for, yeah, it goes for even. And it almost feels bad, playing removal and not being able to remove the Mayhem Devil, like something that's so essential in the Jump deck's ability to survive.
Yeah, I'm going to upgrade your almost feels bad to a feels bad, man. That stinks. Like, Mayhem Devil's the most important card. You just played a 4-mana removal spell that left it on the battlefield. Like, ouch.
Yeah.
Not where you want to be.
Oh, and this is so smart from Luis. And it's so cool because Dreadhorde Butcher also functions as a 1/1 for the Lovestruck Beast. If only just a turn, it's going to be the turn that he needs to be able to win.
Yeah, and it looks like he is going to line up for a very probable victory here, as he can play the Butcher, get in for 9 here, and put Peter down to 1 with nothing going on. If the Dreadhorde Butcher dies at any point, Peter will die. If he can't sweep the board, he will die. There's just no real outs here for Peter. And, this is how this happens sometimes with the Sultai Midrange deck. It plays a lot of lands, and it has the ability to get a lot of those lands on the battlefield, but it really does need one of its big payoffs like an Ugin or a Hydroid Krasis to kind of turbo it into the late game. And in this case, Peter never found it.
Yeah, I was going to say the only top deck that could have saved him, which is just a 1-of in his deck, was the Ugin. But even then, I mean, being so low against the Sacrifice deck that can ping you a lot of the time, it's just, at that point, you've pretty much lost the game.
That's right. And so game number 1 goes to Luis Scott-Vargas. Both players are 2-0 coming into the round here. As you see, we're actually looking at Luis going to his sideboard plan here. And let's see what he wants to do. Look at this. He's trimming a couple of Mayhem Devils, it looks like.
Yeah, I think going more onto the game plan of I have creatures, I have damage, I'm going to destroy your face, as opposed to anything else that Peter might be playing onto the board, is the adjustment that we're seeing here from Luis. Because, Peter has Uro, Peter has occasionally maybe Sharks or a Hydroid Krasis. But otherwise, there's not too much to worry about there. You just really want to maximize face damage. I mean, Mayhem Devil excels on dealing 1 damage at a time, and that's so good against like the Goblins matchup, but it's just not as trivial here, or it's not as important here.
All right, well, let's get into game number 2 as both players finish sideboarding.
Yeah, I can imagine that the Sultai player has a little bit more nuanced decision making because there's so many variants to Jund. Because they're sacrifice, but they're sacrifice with Ballista Citadel, their sacrifice with Collected Company, their sacrifice with Trail of Crumbs. So it's interesting. I don't think anyone's been able to piece together one conclusive game plan. I think you just have to take it list to list.
Yeah, well, if you put a few choices in front of Luis and one of them has Collected Company in it, he's very likely to go for that. He loves that card. Obviously recognizing how powerful it is, but also he just enjoys it. Calling it a pet card of his would be probably a little too strong because it's such a powerful staple in formats where you can play it, but it really is a card he goes back to over and over. Ooh, look at that Corvold in the opener here. Not a lot of ways to get up to it, but
yeah. Oh, I love Corvold. I mean, that is such an excellent card because in this format is essentially hexproof from spot removal, given that Heartless Act and Eliminator are the two most popular played. So it's really cool to see this the king return in these kinds of decks. And bouncing off your Collected Company comment, it's just so satisfying to play a lot of creatures at once.
A couple of big turns coming up here for Luis. Needs to find some land drops off the top of the library to keep things rolling. Can curve out here for the next turn, at least. Can play a Priest of the Forgotten Gods next turn, regardless of land count. But then if there's no more mana coming, that could get a little bit sketchy here for Luis. So we'll keep a close eye on that development. On the other hand, Peter doing well here to keep things rolling as far as curving out as well, but had to use mana to cycle a fetid pools there. Not really where you want to be on turn 2.
Yeah, so it's interesting. From Luis's side, the nuance is that if you don't get to ramp, it's not only limitations to how powerful the cards you play are, but it's also stacking a higher density of, even converted mana cost creatures, making yourself way more vulnerable to Extinction Event.
And you see that Extinction Event looming in hand there for Peter as well, as we see a pretty juicy board for it. I mean, this is kind of where you want to be, getting 2 key creatures off the board. And of course, the fact that it's an exile effect is really important here, given the Dreadhorde Butcher, and just frankly, keeping cards out of the graveyard depending on how things go. But there we go. Extinction Event, naming even and wiping away the 2 cards. But there's a land off the top of the library now for Luis, so he is right back in this. And frankly, that land was super important, not just to get the Woe Strider down, but because the Woe Strider can help him scry to yet another land here.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, because I was just about to say that this land was important, but just as important as the next land, because getting to 3 is one thing, but getting to Collected Company is kind of the big goal. If you're able to throw down 2 Mayhem Devils off there, then you're really going to be able to pick off the Nissa land, the Nissa itself, and ooh, interesting. It looks like Peter is choosing not to go for Nissa, but instead to just hold up Heartless Act and ramp up a little bit more. And I like this a lot, actually.
Yeah, I bet you that Peter's really scared of, in fact, the card that Luis has in hand here, Claim the Firstborn.
Yeah.
Stealing your land and, usually being able to just kill Nissa on the spot, as well as get in for a bunch of damage, and sometimes even sacrifice the land, like in this case, is just a disaster. For Peter, by playing it this way, especially with that Growth Spiral now, Peter can cast Growth Spiral and Heartless Axe still in this turn cycle and really be efficient on mana while not taking that big risk. Oh, that hurts for Luis.
Yeah.
Uses the Woe Strider to try to find lands, but sees one of the best cards on top of the library there. It was a Mayhem Devil, but that's got to go to the bottom because Luis really needs to find land, though he doesn't. In fact, he finds a Dreadhorde Butcher for the turn.
Gosh, this is starting to become a brutal sequence for Luis. I mean, we're going to potentially see Peter throw down a Heartless Act, but I wonder if he's going to prioritize throwing it on the Butcher, which scales itself. Or okay, he's going on the Woe Strider, which makes perfect sense because you want to be able to limit any ability to sacrifice in the Jund sacrifice deck,
Right.
And you know that Luis isn't going to get to 5 anytime soon. So you don't have to worry about it coming back.
That's right, and it looks like for Luis, he had a short pause there on, do I sacrifice this Cauldron Familiar to the Woe Strider just to try to, hit these land drops? But nah, I'm just going to keep the pressure up. You're down to 12. I'm going to make you do something here, Peter.
Well, he does have an option to sink his mana into. The worst case scenario is that he throws Giganta back. But again, if he doesn't get to 5 anytime soon, then there won't be really a point to bringing that back. So it's an interesting decision that he made there.
Yeah, good point. Giganta the Wellspring sitting over there as well as something perhaps for down the line. But as you said, does it really count as a place to spend your mana if you can't ever cast it? It's kind of hard to say.
The other thing is, and while it feels bad to float mana when you're already so low on lands, Claim the Firstborn is a very viable option. When you see Peter sitting there with an Uro about to throw down, you know you're going to have a really good feel when you're able to play that card.
Still, this is sketchy territory here for Peter. Played an untapped land there to make sure that Uro hit the battlefield. And now it's Uro plus a land available, but we could see Claim the Firstborn have a major effect on this game. Now, with no sack outlet currently, yikes. Sheltered Thicket was the draw step there for Luis. But he's just going to steal Uro and try to hit a land drop here while applying massive pressure.
Yeah, and this time we'll specify a land that could be played during the turn untapped.
Exactly. This Sheltered Thicket could hit the battlefield either way, but there we go, an Overgrown Tomb off the top. Now, does it matter at this point?
No, there's no real difference here because there's nothing for you to cast. I mean, you can even cycle your Thicket if you'd like to, if you're Luis. I mean, it might just be better to get a little deeper into your deck now that you're at 4, because Collect the Company might just be the play as opposed to Corvold.
I see. Yeah, it looks like Luis is going to keep options open, play the Thicket tapped here, and have options on Corvold or Collected Company going forward. It depends on how this board looks. This is a big, scary turn here for Luis. This is letting Peter untap with Nissa, but so far, Peter's only been able to spin his wheels, casting Growth Spiral, cycling a Triome, and now probably just going to cycle a Fetid Pools. That was a big whiff, and once again, Peter is in a position where if this doesn't hit something huge, which it didn't,
yeah,
he's ramped up. I mean, Peter has access to a ton of mana and nothing to do with it.
He's all ramped up with nowhere to go. I mean, I think eventually he can draw a payoff, but it's gonna boil down to the payoff here, I think. I mean, my brain can't help but think of the best case scenarios for how Luis comes back a little bit in this game. And just imagine he top decks, Claim the Firstborn into the Uro is able to ramp up another land, you're able to Corvold sacrifice the Uro. Is like, Luis has some really scary things that he could do to Peter. And that's why if you're Peter, you're hoping to draw something to counteract all that funny business that can happen.
That's right. And we've seen many times Corvold start that chain for himself, right? You play Corvold, you sack a thing, and then you get a thing, and all of a sudden you find a sacrifice outlet, and Corvold's a 9/9 before you can even blink. Now, Peter currently does not have an answer for Corvold at all, but has Nissa Who Shakes the World active with an Uro on the battlefield and a land. So there's a lot of upside here for Peter. He just needs to find it.
Yeah, I think he's just mulling on, should I play the Uro, draw myself another card, just get deeper and deeper, because the chances are I'm going to find something, or is it just very important to protect this Nissa? And I think that decision boils down to, can I protect this Nissa from getting destroyed by the Butcher? I mean, you see 4 damage on the board, but if Luis has any sort of sacrifice outlet for the Dreadhorde Butcher, then that will result in getting rid of the Nissa.
All right, let's see what happens here. There's a Grafdigger's Cage, which could slow things down at least a little bit. But right now, it looks like the name of the game is either Collected Company or Corvold for Luis, and that's the big decision point that he's got as far as, is it better to just get Corvold down, which could be lethal as early as next turn, and just say, here, deal with this? Or is there combinations of cards that could get Luis the win or some type of lock earlier, or maybe even take care of Nissa? And that's what we're going to look at here.
Well, so one really interesting interaction is swinging into the Nissa with your Dreadhorde Butcher, because if the Breeding Pool blocks, then, you deal 3 damage. But if Peter, for some reason, decides not to block, then you can hit the Butcher in and then sacrifice the Butcher to your Corvold and be able to take care of the Nissa that way.
Also, I just remembered that Grafdigger's Cage down now actually just blanks the company anyway. So it is just going to be Corvold. It's just a matter of what can Luis do with it, and how can he try to take advantage of really one of his most powerful cards, full stop, right? Just in his deck. and see what he can do.
I mean, we've honestly been seeing Jund Sacrifice do some very not Jund Sacrifice-like things. I mean, I think Luis is playing very fair here. You know, he's got the
well, it's going to get really unfair very soon here, because just as we outlined a minute ago, Corvold sometimes kind of starts its own engine, right? Because sacrifice the land and boom, immediately Luis hits Witch's Oven, which can get another card and at least start to keep the cards flowing for Scott-Vargas here.
Yeah,
although that said, his hand looks kind of scrubby here with the collected company that's not doing anything as well as a redundant Corvold.
Yeah, and you can't even escape the Woe Strider with the Graph Digger's Cage on the board. I don't know. I mean, I think the Corvold has potential to just get really ridiculous. But you know, all these sacrifice options are not very good. There are definitely some lines. You know, you could Witch's Oven your Cauldron Familiar, and then you could eat your food. You could always play a Corvold and then go ahead and Witch's Oven the Corvold for more foods. I mean, you have plenty of room for sacrifice outlets if you're Luis, but it's just a matter of if Peter is ever going to find his big payoff. Right now, he's just kind of drawing empty with a bunch of Uros, but eventually he's going to have to hit something that blows Luis out of the water. I think it's just a race against that kind of clock.
Yeah, because the one thing is that, you know, regardless of the other stuff going on the battlefield that is trying to nerf Luis's strategy, Corvold is just a very big flyer and could get bigger. Wow, look at this. Peter with Leyline of the Void and Graph Digger's Cage. He has definitely come prepared for these graveyard-based strategies.
He's ready.
He is ready. He does not like the sacrifice deck, apparently. The Cage of, you know, brick walling multiple types of cards from Luis Scott-Vargas, and the Leyline making sure that nothing ever adds to it in case he does find an answer for the Cage if he has one.
Well, so the Leyline is very interestingly effective. I know some people might be thinking, oh, well, the Graph Digger's Cage already out. What is the Leyline going to do? But with just Graph Digger's Cage and no Leyline, sacrificing your Cauldron Familiar and then potentially having more than one food on your board can play out to your favor, because you just continually use your cat. Like you still have room to use the cat. But now that the Leyline is gone, you're just not going to be able to get free sacrifices of food.
So Luis says, well, you know what? I need to get this Uro off the battlefield. I'm going to block with Corvold and make a trade here. Remember, Luis has a backup Corvold in hand, and look at that, Reclamation Sage in hand now as well. This could at least take care of the Cage to free up a collected company down the line if think Luis is still alive.
Yeah, that is important. I mean, he is at 8 life right now, so it's less of can I do this, and more of do I have time to do this before I just get destroyed.
Yeah, and you know, he very well could. The Corvold comes down as a 4/4, immediately can sacrifice a permanent and become a 5/5. That means that Peter's attacks don't actually look that great here, right? It'll be 2 3/3s, assuming that there's nothing else going on. And that is not a great situation for an attack there.
Yeah, it really boils down to spot removal. If Peter finds removal or finds a big, you know, proactive threat, Luis is done. But this may be a turning point to removing the Nissa, clearing off Peter's board, and just getting a grip back onto this game. Because I feel like since Luis whiffed on his land draws earlier, he's kind of been clawing his way back in here.
It does feel like that for sure. This is a huge turn sequence here for Peter. And with Scry 2 from Castle Vantris on the stack, this is where Luis is going bottom, 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 bottom. Because if that happens, you know, Peter's still left scrambling, looking for an answer for Corvold. Luis now has Vraska and Reclamation Sage in hand, so can take care of these problematic sideboard cards from Peter and unlock the power of his deck again. But he needs a little bit of time to do it. And this is a situation, and by the way, it was 1 top, 1 bottom, where Peter can apply massive pressure. It looks like he put Nissa, who shakes the world, on top, so he can make 2 3/3 lands this turn, potentially getting in for 6 damage.
Yeah, it's worth noting that depending on how much Peter has in the graveyard, pushing this Nissa into the yard might be exactly what he needs to get his Uro online. So
good point. Yeah, that could happen too, and that could find the removal spell that Peter needs. At any rate, Peter says, all right, well, if I can't beat you this turn, I'm going to put this Nissa on top of my library, and I am going to apply maximum pressure to you on the board right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also interesting because, again, like we were saying with the spot removal, is at this point, this would have just been lethal if Peter had a little bit more, but it's still looking brutal for Luis. I mean, you've got your dragon on the board, but it's it's really hard to come back from this.
I would just do 19 with Corvold if it were me, but it's a playstyle thing,
true.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, that's usually much more of an option when you have Cauldron Familiar, Witches Oven online, but with Grafdigger's Cage and Leyline of the Void, it's kind of impossible. I mean,
this is interesting now, though. It was a Cauldron Familiar drawn. This is because, look, you know, Peter was trying to say, okay, if you want to attack and kill my Nissa, you're going to need to sacrifice another thing, and you're going to need to turn your Corvold sideways, and that's going to leave you open, you know, to death from one of these lands that I've got going on here. But Luis can cast 2 spells this turn now. He can cast Rexage plus Familiar, or go Vraska plus Rexage, you know, or Vraska plus Familiar, and that will actually allow this to happen. So Corvold's going to attack, sacrifice the land that was tapped for the Cauldron Familiar, take out Nissa, and if I'm in Peter's seat, I'm like, gulp. Now all of a sudden, there are going to be 2 blockers down, and the
quite get there because the Cauldron Familiar could get thrown into the yard, and actually, yeah, if you get thrown into the yard, you can get the food.
Save Luis, right?
Exactly, exactly.
And that was, by the way, the pause that you saw from Luis on end step is he was considering using his 3 mana to put Jegantha in the hand because, well, what else am I going to use it for? But he was like, well, there is an answer to that, and it is to pay for sacrificing food potentially.
Exactly. So it's interesting because you don't normally think of food as something to eat. You just usually look at it as something to use for your cat.
Yeah, that sentence was, yes, true somehow, but true nonetheless.
If you're thinking entirely in the context of Magic the Gathering, that sentence was perfect.
Yes, that is exactly right. Because otherwise I was thinking lunchtime, you know? All right, so the cat's going to block.
So this is fascinating. From Luis's perspective, he chose not to use his Reclamation Sage as a chip blocker, almost adding extra damage or just an extra card to have on the board. It's really neat. It's a really neat line because you'd think being so low and being, you know, so toast to another Nissa draw, you'd like to protect yourself a little more. But I think Luis is just navigating without any fear.
He's kind of killing it at this point. I have to say that decision by Peter to leave the Nissa on top of the library in order to apply maximum pressure to Luis's life total has not worked out, as Luis has just found some kind of random blockers, a Cauldron Familiar, a Reclamation Sage that might get it done, and all of a sudden Peter is facing down death next turn to Corvold in the air.
Yeah, my gosh, this is starting to get a little brutal. I mean, honestly, if you bring the Cauldron Familiar back and deal an extra 1/2 damage from the Corvold going to 12, and then Bone Crusher going for 2. I'm just trying to see if there's any actual lethal here. I think
there may be.
It looks like we're just a few points removed from being able to do so, but darn, we're getting close. It swung around real fast. I mean, it boiled down to Peter never was able to find a big payoff, really.
This is where Luis is like, just don't show me an extinction event, right?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I would mourn the death of our king.
Indeed.
Yeah. So this is Peter's last turn to do something really impactful to swing this around. I mean, we see
Did
a land.
Luis just open up a burrito? What is going on? He literally just started eating a burrito.
I mean, it looks like he's feeling okay with this game, I guess. You don't bring out the burrito till you know you got the win, huh?
He must have heard what you said about food.
You want to prove me wrong. I mean, what better time to eat a burrito than directly in the middle of your round 3 Mythic Invitational match? I can't think of a better time.
Yeah, or round 4, or round 2, or round 5, or before the tournament. You know, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I already ate a burrito today.
Oh gosh,
It
yeah,
was a
you're right.
breakfast burrito, but you know, what are you gonna
All
do?
right, last turn of Draw Extinction event off the top, and that's not it. That's
No, triple
game.
Uro here with no Nissa, though, on the battlefield here for Peter. He just doesn't have the flexibility that he enjoyed most of this game by being able to cast 100 things. And all of a sudden, Corvold Fakehurst King is just hovering there in the air, and it's a good game from Peter, and Luis toasts him with his burrito as he picks up the victory here.
Well fought.
An improbable win there for Luis Scott-Vargas, stumbling on mana early, but able to pull out the victory there.